Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 200 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. We made it. I am your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and two-time author. Our second book, From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing, is available now, so go and buy that book today on Amazon. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring fraternity and sorority leaders together. Fun fact, 6 years ago, I was praying to have these books, the podcast, and the best team of speakers in the country to help guide undergraduate fraternity and sorority members all over the country. I'm very fortunate to have 200 people that wanted to tell the story of fraternity with me on this podcast, and I've truly learned something from every single guest on the show. So thank you to all of our guests. Thank you to all of our loyal listeners over the last 3 years. Now, today on New Year's Day, we have with us Brian Warren Jr. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Sigma Phi Epsilon Fraternity. SigEp is a valued partner in higher education that delivers a premier student experience. Brian is responsible for leading the headquarters staff and implementing SigEp's strategic plan. He works with the National Board, SigEp National Housing and Education Foundation trustees to ensure that SigEp is meeting its goals and providing the best possible experience for its brothers. Brian also collaborates with other organizations and their leadership to help advance the entire fraternity and sorority community. Happy New Year, Brian, and welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Hey, it's my pleasure. It's truly an honor to be with you today. I know all of our listeners have been looking forward to this moment for a long time. So this is definitely a treat for them. I really appreciate you taking the time out. I know how busy your schedule is, but I want to make sure that all of our listeners know about your background because I think it's just really fascinating. You went to UVA, the University of Virginia, for your undergraduate experience. So I'm wondering, why was UVA the right choice for you?
There's a longer story here. I'm going to give you the short version of it. I grew up with my mom and my brother. And like a lot of people today, I think they can probably share a story of having just one parent around and becoming very dependent on each other to do everything that needs to be done in a family. And so my father didn't go to college. My mother went to a junior college, but I really didn't have also a lot of the guidance in my family around what college is and how to approach it. My mom knew that she wanted me to go to a great school. Fortunately, Virginia is blessed with a lot of great institutions in the state, and we tried to get into the best of them. I was very fortunate to get accepted to UVA, and but really that was where I looked. It was just inside the state, and it was in-state tuition was a lot more affordable back then too. So that helped really just narrow down the choices. And in retrospect, I just feel very blessed that I was able to go to such a great institution and that I found SigEp while I was there.
Yeah. What an amazing place. That campus is absolutely beautiful. Every time I go there, I'm just in awe as I'm walking around campus because it's just really a stunning, stunning campus. And you bring up SigEp and how lucky you were to find them. You serve Sigma Phi Epsilon's Virginia Eta chapter as their president. What was so special about the Virginia Eta chapter that made you want to join?
I joined because of the people. And I think that's probably the case for a lot of young men. You join a chapter because of the fact that it has individuals in there that you aspire to be like. And so I saw a lot of the older members in that chapter, and I knew that they were going to be successful. They came from different backgrounds than what I came from. They really had their stuff together. Great academic performers, very involved at UVA, and I knew that I wanted to be around those individuals. That unfortunately wasn't everyone in the chapter, and they weren't. Those personalities weren't necessarily reflective of the culture of the chapter. So it's I think it's worth probably pointing out here that my experience as an undergraduate was very unlike the work that we're advancing today. In fact, I would say it's the opposite or antithesis of what we aspire to do today as an organization. My chapter just reopened after about 10 years of being dormant, and still the experience that I had is what motivates me to do what I do today. I don't want any undergraduate, any young man in the country to experience what I went through. I saw SigEp at its best when I went to the Ruck Leadership Institute as an undergraduate. That was eye-opening to me. I did not know that was what fraternity could be. And every day since then, I've been committed to making sure that young men have a great, safe, rewarding, relevant SigEp experience, just one that matters in their life. That's life-changing. Like I described my experience. I want it to be life-changing for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. That really blows me away, because that's where I think you and I have a lot in common. We certainly both joined our respective fraternities for the men that were in it, right? As the saying goes in the industry, people join people. But all of that being said, we might not have had the ideal experience. I certainly didn't either. Some of the hazing that I went through is something that I talk about in some of the hazing prevention talks that I give around the country. And I think that is what motivated me to get involved and to try to change it to be more like what my vision was for the organization. I felt it could be great, but there were some mistakes that were being made, and maybe that was the fire to continue to work on it. So that's really good. So at graduation, you went to work for Sigma Phi Epsilon as regional director, and then eventually you became the director of learning communities, helping to establish SigEp's learning communities. Now, this is a very rigorous application process, but students in these living learning communities have higher overall grades. They're much more engaged in on-campus activities, and they're more likely to spend their time outside of the classroom developing the life skills they need to succeed after graduation. So how is this living learning model that you've implemented, how is that different from what the traditional fraternity experience might be like, let's say, in other organizations?
So I'd say first at a high level, this whole effort's like 20 years old, and it's shocking that it's been around that long. I wish I'd be able to say we've made more progress than we have. We've got about 60 accredited SigEp learning communities today, and relative to 200 chapters. Again, over 20 years, I think you'd wish that it was a lot more. The whole point of this was to reclaim the role that the fraternity home plays in the undergraduate experience. I know I've seen a lot, right? I mean, for too long, a lot of our fraternity homes have been a place that is simply a party venue, and it happens to house young men, and the rest of the house is a party scene. And this program was intended to reclaim the role of the fraternity home and make it one that is safe, that cultivates academic excellence, that brings people into the facility that can really help in the academic and developmental experiences. And that wasn't happening enough. And when you consider that 90% of the undergraduate experience is happening outside of a classroom, a lot of the time that an undergraduate spends is probably going to be in that fraternity home. And so is it instilling great habits? Is it providing development opportunities that you're just not going to get in a classroom? Is it allowing you to really understand what a healthy relationship is and how to develop one without using alcohol as a crutch for conversation and interaction? And there's so much that can be done over a 4-year period if you have the right experiences being delivered in the right environment. And this program is our attempt to reclaim kind of ownership over both.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely love it. And I think it really does kind of return back to the origin of the fraternity house, the reason why it was important for men to gather. obviously
Yeah.
much more of, a learning collaborative. It was much more about debate and things like that, not necessarily for the social events. It was more about having that debate amongst brothers and having it be a learning place outside of the classroom where they could discuss things that maybe they weren't allowed to discuss on campus.
Yeah, I wish a lot of people knew that history. You're absolutely right. That was why we got together and were formed. It's why a lot of these chapter homes were created. It's why so many of the older ones were built so close to campus, because the learning continued at the home. Conversations were happening at the home that weren't allowed to take place or couldn't take place for some reason or another on those campuses inside the classroom. Your history there is great, I wish more people knew about it.
Yeah, that history has definitely been lost. And when I think about our founders that started our respective organizations in the 1800s, I wonder what they think about fraternity today, or what they would think if they were alive today. And I think, some of the housing really just being used for social events to them would be just completely foreign. They really wouldn't understand, how that evolution took place, probably very different from what they had envisioned, right? So that's really interesting to me. Now, also in January of 2010, at the age of 27, you became SigEp's executive director. And for those who are not, familiar with headquarters, I mean, that's a very young age to become an executive director of a national fraternity. And you've been an advocate for the role that SigEp can play in student safety and the development of healthy relationships. You were selected to participate in President Obama's task force to protect students from sexual assault. I also almost immediately began working on student safety and the development of healthy relationships as exec back in 2012, because I knew that fraternity has to lead in this area if we're going to take our oath seriously to the fraternity. However, over the last few months, we've seen protests on the front lawn of fraternity houses all across the country where students are demanding accountability and transparency from the institution as it relates to sexual assault. So one could argue that really we haven't made a lot of progress in this area. So what needs to happen to end hazing, student deaths, sexual assaults, and other student safety issues on college campuses? And how can the fraternity and sorority community help to make that a reality?
There's so much to unpack here with that question. First off, I was probably way too young and inexperienced at 27 to do the important work that needs to be done today. I think we've made a lot of progress since 2010. I'm living proof as to how much gray hair can be grown in just an 11-year period as a result of what we've done over the last decade. But I think one of the defining moments for me in this role, Mike, was and it's not even once, unfortunately, experiencing the death of young men and interacting with their parents is a life-altering experience. And it will force you to think about what's really important in the work that we do. And it will challenge you to zoom in and focus on the things that can really affect student safety. And unfortunately, I feel that too many Greek organizations and honestly, too many campus professionals, and that's not just people in Greek life, I think it's probably in other areas too, that we're spending time on things that really don't move the safety meter. And I think a lot of the jobs on college campus, even though that's a top priority for them, I think the job description, the focus of certain jobs, ultimately doesn't come back to the things that prevent death in fraternity. I would say, and we don't have the silver bullet. I don't know that we fully figured this thing out, but I think we've developed at SigEp a real focus on areas that we believe can impact student safety. And as a result of following that recipe, if you will, we've had a 0% loss run for the last 5 years. There's a different conversation about the insurance industry and how our premiums still go up despite that great loss run, because the industry itself that we live in isn't doing as well as that. And everyone knows that if you follow the news, you've seen what's happened just last year. I think no one thought that we were going to lose young men in a pandemic, but we lost, I think, at least 3. And, that the fact that it continues to happen year after year is kind of, it's unforgivable that we can't get it together. So when I mentioned that we've got these things that we focus on, one of them, and I think what the most important thing is who we recruit and how we recruit. And there's data now that you can go to understand the relationship between recruitment and student safety. How members join, what their motivations are for joining, can tell you an awful lot about what's going to happen with that individual over the course of his experience. And I think generally what we've seen is that individuals who join chapters through our traditional rush model, which shockingly hasn't evolved in decades, despite existing in a place that's supposed to advance innovation as we learn in higher education. You can learn an awful lot. And I think what we found is that when we recruit year round and have much more intentional dialogue, longer dialogue with individuals, we can understand their motivations for joining and whether or not it's for a true sense of belonging, it's for leadership development or professional development, the things that drive a positive experience and not just a social dynamic. And people who are joining predominantly through Rush are joining for that social dynamic. And not all of them, but we need to acknowledge what's there and what the challenges are and provide opportunities for people to join who have better motivations and push organizations to recruit year round so that we can find people who are motivated by the right things. I'd say the second thing that we look at is around the experience itself. And we have this saying in SigEp, when there's a void, someone's going to fill it, right? And when you talk about 18 to 22-year-olds, typically that void's going to be filled with things that they see going on around them. And it's going to be the thing that's the easiest thing to do. And going to get a bunch of beer, bringing it back to the house, or in this case, worse stuff now, bringing it back to the house and throwing a big party is the easiest thing to do. And it's considered to be attached to the greatest amount of social capital on a campus. We've got to provide the structure and the network of support and the resources that stimulate learning every day. We've got to fill that void every day with things that are positive. And it takes a staff, it takes campus resources, it takes alumni involvement, and everyone singing from the same sheet of music to do this the right way. I think that the last thing that we look at is the environment itself. And I'm going to probably elaborate a little bit more on that volunteer component in here too. We just talked about SigEp learning communities and redefining the role of a fraternity home. That is critical. But I think when you look at a lot of fraternities today, we do not have the ability to have staff members on site 24/7 providing the guidance that should be provided to young men. And it requires us to look at the alumni base and find alumni who can be great volunteers and investing resources to help them be the great volunteers to make the life-changing experience we want to provide. And I'll say at SigEp, we haven't invested enough here. But I think over the next few years, you'll say, wow, they are going all in on the volunteer front, all in. I mean, I think when we talk about where we're pushing our resources, it's in that direction. Mm-hmm. And I hope that other organizations will follow suit and do something very similar. And I'll pause there because, like I said, I think there's a lot to unpack here. We could talk for an hour just on this topic because it's complex. It's complex stuff, but it's the most important thing I think we do. If you can't keep people safe, what are we doing? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're 100% right with that answer. I mean, it's spot on. Go back and rewind and listen to that again, because I think it's critical. You talk about a focus on student safety, I knew instinctively that I had to focus on that as exec, talk about it every time I was given a microphone, write articles about it, international magazine. I mean, it had to be all the time, that focus on student safety, because now you see the other side of it, which is high liability insurance premiums. And now the undergraduates can't afford to join our fraternities because of the high cost of liability insurance premium, despite the fact that you had no losses over the last 5 years. As an industry, we keep having all of these losses. And so not only are we losing our brothers, but also on top of that, it's not even affordable. I mean, the liability insurance premium is just climbing, to no end. I also think about the rush period that you talk about. The systems that we have in terms of recruitment are broken, because if we are just going to get to know men on our campuses for 2 weeks in the first 2 weeks of the semester, there is no way that we actually know them, that we know that they're a fit in terms of our values. There's no way we can come to that determination if we have just this rush mentality. We have to be recruiting men and having a 365-day view of all of the men that we're recruiting over time, not over 2 weeks. So that's absolutely important. And also, you mentioned the new member experience. That's really what we wrote about in that second book, From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education, because we recognize that hasn't really changed in 100 years. And we have to relook at that and say, is this still applicable, or can we make some changes? And I think some of the things that you hinted at are things that, we would love to change as well. So I hope that more people will read that book. And I hope that the other fraternities that are out there will also do some of the same things that you've been able to implement. And you're absolutely right. We can't do this without the alumni. I mean, to think that our staff is going to be able to be there at every chapter on a Tuesday night, absolutely impossible. It's just impossible. We have to rely on our alumni to get this done. It's the only way.
Yes,
So,
you're right on everything.
Yeah, very good. Now, you believe that the Balanced Man program is fundamental to the membership experience. Talk to us about the success of the Balanced Man program over the years, and how has it become really the gold standard in our industry?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'd say there's still a lot of work that we want to do on it. There's so much more that we want to do for undergraduate brothers. But this program started 30 years ago. And I'll build on a comment that I made earlier. There's a void in the undergraduate experience, right? We had historically just focused on a few weeks of pledging. And then we had no structure, no plan for support, no plan to stimulate certain activities after that new member period. And that had to change. The second thing is the Balanced Man program eliminated this two-tiered structure of new members and older members. And it replaced a seniority structure with, I think, more of a meritocracy structure. And when you have a seniority structure, you have people who just by nature of the system in place are going to be asked to prove it to people who are older and feel more entitled. And that creates this dynamic where hazing is going to creep in. And for us, we've tried to eliminate even the word pledge from our vernacular, unless we're talking fundraising. Right, the word pledge doesn't exist for us. You are a member. You may be a new member. You're a member with equal rights and responsibilities that come with membership. That is fundamentally what life is about too. Is you're going to treat people with respect, the dignity that they deserve as a human, and you're going to find a way to work together to make yourself better, each other better, your team better. Hopefully the communities that you live in better. That requires a team effort and dynamic that we hope to instill through the Balanced Man program. We also have a structured way of delivering volunteer support. Mentoring is a critical tenet of that program. Living the ritual is a critical tenet of that program. Continuous development that I already talked about is a critical tenet of that program, and accountability, which is maybe an overused term today, but not realized as often as we say it. Those are the 5 things the program is based on. And if we see those 5 things play out every day, I think we're going to see a dramatically different type of fraternity experience. It takes more resources to do those things, right? You know, an 8-week pledging system is it's a low resource, low focus type of activity, but it's one that's led to tragedy year after year after year. I would say it's one of those archaic systems that has to just go away. And when are we going to learn that that pledging leads to hazing, and hazing often leads to death? That stuff has to go away.
Mm-hmm. I think this is why I'm such a huge fan of Sigma Phi Epsilon, because you are taking bold steps like you talked about, removing pledging from the experience, rethinking new member recruitment, training new volunteers to be effective mentors, and even implementing substance-free facilities to provide these young men a safe and relevant fraternity experience. But other organizations have struggled to change the way that we've operated in fraternity, especially since our organizations are over 100 years old, and tradition is a very powerful concept in our world and within our alumni. So how have you been able to make such bold steps to revolutionize how fraternity is done, despite some of the members of the organization wanting to stay true to the way that we've always done it?
So I love the way that SigEp does business. We love to solve problems. And so I would say that the first thing that any organization needs to do is define something as a problem, use data to help people understand the extent of the problem, and inspire some urgency to solve the problem. But we wouldn't have gotten to substance-free facilities if we didn't say, we've got a big problem. Our loss ratio is way too high. Young men are getting hurt. There are some things that we can do about it. What are we going to do about it? And we put a lot of people around the table, and we said, we're going to agree on at least an investigative path forward. And we put that investigative structure to place to bring back objectivity that no one could object to for subjective reasons. You know, your personal ego is going to be left out of this conversation, and you are going to look at what the insurance industry is doing and what the carriers were saying. You're going to look at what higher ed was saying and what their opinions were. You're going to look at our best chapters and what they're doing and how they're performing. And you're going to look at some of our peers and see what they're doing and how they're performing. And we've looked at those 4 buckets and all of the information that came back in those 4 buckets. We said, overwhelmingly, this tells the story of what needs to be done. And at that point, you can't argue with it. It is so crystal clear that to not take action would be negligence. And that's created the urgency in our organization. And I've said to a lot of people, well, I love SigEp because we never say where we are today is enough. There's always something else that we want to do. There's always an opportunity to get better. But it does start with us saying there's a problem and we're going to fix it, and we're going to fix it the right way. We're going to go all in. Like I talked about with volunteers, we're going to fix this and invest all the resources that really need to be invested to really solve the problem and to keep doing it, to have that solution in place in perpetuity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that mindset. And that's probably where I get misunderstood sometimes, is there's just that I'm going to demand that the organizations that I belong to are going to live up to the values. And if you're not, I'm going to call you out on it. It's not that I don't like the organization. It's just that I'm striving to be better all the time. Like it never ends.
Yeah. But that's a grown-up conversation. Yeah, that's a grown-up conversation. Like if I just want to nod my head at someone, that we're not helping each other.
Right.
You know, that's not brotherhood. That's not brotherly love in SigEp's world. I mean, brotherly love is honest conversation.
Right. Yep, that's where it starts. Now, in 2013, SigEp's National Board of Directors and the Educational Foundation Board of Trustees, they promoted you to CEO, and they added fundraising and stewardship of charitable contributions to your very long list of responsibilities at SigEp. So how has SigEp been able to build such a strong culture of giving and get the big results that it gets?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to make sure people understand the problem. We've talked a lot about the problems that exist in the world of Greek life and in higher education. And we've said, look, we're committed to being a part of the solution. And people want to give money to being a part of the solution and help ensure that resources aren't what's holding back that solution. And so when we talk about things like mental health, we talk about things like career preparedness or professional preparedness, leadership development, healthy relationships, and student safety. These are problems in higher education. And we're crystal clear on what exactly we think the problem is and the extent of the problem. And in some cases, you have to be hiding under a rock to not see how big some of these problems are. But we're also pretty clear about what we think the solution is or how we can be a part of the solution. And I believe that inspires people to give. But you've got to communicate with people often about this work. And that's been a real challenge for us. I mean, we're very fortunate at SigEp that we have Heather Kirk and we have a great communication team. We've got Joe Buddy owning our information systems, and he's rocket sciences smart. I mean, he is just crazy intelligent, and a number of other just really talented staff people who can help us tell this story and communicate what we're doing and inspire confidence in what we're doing. And I hope that people know that we have a very competent staff that can go out and actually achieve or implement these solutions that we talk about. And when you give us money, we're going to be good stewards of those gifts. And I think in order to be deserving of seven-figure gifts, people have to have confidence in your staff and in your operation and in your purpose. And so I hope that we're moving consistently in that direction year after year, getting better and better.
You are. There's no question in my mind. You are getting better and better every single year. Now, the other thing about SigEp that I find to be really interesting is that your chapter retention and your graduation rates are consistently above average. So how has recruitment and retention been during this pandemic? And then as we start to return to these in-person events, let's say, this fall and this spring, talk to us about recruitment and retention and graduation rates.
Yeah. So, I mean, we were down like everyone else, but we lost a little more than 7% of our members during the pandemic. And I've heard other groups losing a lot more. Mm-hmm. We had something of value, I think, that we could offer despite a pandemic being there and not being able to do a lot of those social things that people were used to doing. And I heard a great line from an alumnus who's an executive, a very successful person that I go to often for membership. And he said, look, you're prepared to navigate this pandemic, not because of how fast you're responding today, but what you've done over the last 5 years to put yourself in a position to be flexible from a resource perspective, to have opportunities to deliver value to young men when you can't get together. I mean, we were able to do and experience a lot of the success that we experienced over the pandemic because going all the way back to 2015, we were doing the things that we should have been doing, and we were moving quickly to do those things that we should have been doing. And I think, like most organizations, the pandemic only challenged us to think more deeply about the quality of what we were delivering to undergraduates. And if there's something that comes out of this crisis that we've been in over the last 2 years, for us, it's been that we've been deep thinkers and really honest about what's working and what's not working and where we can get better. And that's put us in a position to allocate resources much more thoughtfully to how we're going to advance new member recruitment the right way and empower our chapters to do it the right way, how we're going to get more volunteers involved to impact the local experience, how we're going to invest resources more thoughtfully in the Balanced Man program and in the SigEp learning community. And when we're doing those 4 things really well, we've got a very solid foundation for all of our chapters to build on. And it really allows us to get into things like DEI and mental health and more advanced career preparedness talk. I mean, those things come easily next if you've got your foundation really strong.
Yeah. I love what you're doing. I'm a huge fan. I think you're going to definitely have continued success by relying on what you've done the last 5 years. There's no question in my mind. Now,
We're
we
excited.
do
Yeah.
we do love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. So I'm wondering, what is your favorite restaurant these days in Richmond, Virginia?
So I knew this question was coming because that's what you do.
Yep.
And this, yeah, I've got 3 kids, as you know. Today, rarely does my menu not look like bar food. I mean, fish sticks, applesauce, chicken tenders, French fries. Yeah, that's that's usually what's going on in such a fast-paced world. But my wife and I, we love sushi. If you're in Richmond and have an opportunity to go to Osaka, I would say go there. It's right next to the University of Richmond. Mm-hmm. We love that place. If we get to go out, we're going to probably go there. The other place, if you're in Richmond and you're searching for kind of this historic venue to go to the Jefferson Hotel, go to La Mer, and sit there and have a great meal and stare at the environment around you, because it's an absolutely beautiful hotel. It's a beautiful restaurant, and that just makes the food taste even better.
2 great suggestions. I love it. And as a dad myself, I understand the days that you're in right now with chicken nuggets and things like that.
Yes.
I mean, that's on the menu every day.
It's shocking how picky your kids can be when they don't even know that much about food.
They're going to learn over time. So this has been great, Brian. I really enjoyed our time together. If our college student listeners want to get more information about bringing SigEp to their campus, or maybe some of the campus administrators that are listening right now, if they want to reach you directly with some questions about SigEp, where should they go to get in contact with you?
So they can reach out to me, brian.warren@sigep.org. Another one of the great staff members that we have is the fraternity's managing director, Zach Gilman, zach.gilman@sigep.org. And we will, or excuse me, .net. Sorry about that. But we will be there to work with you in any way possible, and just let us know. Partnership's critical to us, and that's whether it's a host institution wanting to work with us, or a group of young men wanting to do the right thing and have a great fraternity experience, or a group of alumni who hear this and they say, gosh, I want my chapter back and I want it to look like that. We'll work together and figure out a way to do it.
Mm-hmm. I love that you're a valued partner in higher education. That to me stands above all. That's something that to me, I'm like, wow, like they really appreciate that partnership with higher ed. And that to me just stands out. And so I love it. I love your approach. I love everything that you're doing. Keep up the great work. What can I say? I think it's amazing. So congratulations, Brian.
Thanks, Mike. I really enjoyed this. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's my pleasure. And for all of our listeners, if you enjoyed this, please like it, share it with other SigEp brothers, share it with other fraternity and sorority members on your campus. And we look forward to seeing you on another episode of Fraternity Foodie. Thanks so much, and bye for now.